register these teachers. That was in 1938. In 1941, it was my dad who argued all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court that a white-only railroad union could not exclude blacks because they were not members of a union and then deny them better jobs. This case set the precedent to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If you're interested in the case, it's Bester Steel versus L&N Railroad. It was my dad in 1942 who filed suit on behalf of a black principal, William Boland, to have the salaries of black teachers made equal to those of white teachers. The federal courts decided that the salaries be made equal, but it took Birmingham 4 years to comply with this order, and it's only when they were held in contempt of court that they finally comply. It was my dad in 1948 who represented Senator Glenn Taylor from Idaho after his arrest in Birmingham for deliberately going through a door marked colored only and drinking from a colored only water fountain. It was my dad in 1950 who filed suit to declare the zoning laws of Birmingham unconstitutional. If you were black, we have a street in Birmingham called Center Street. If you were black, you could not live east of Center Street. You couldn't live west of Center Street, you could only live east of Center Street. Well, he represented a lady who had bought a lot on the west side of Center Street. And on the day that Judge Clarence Mullins declared the law unconstitutional and invalid, Miss Monk's home was bombed by the Ku Klux Klan to the ground. But perhaps the most famous of all cases that he's noted for is that of Arthurine Lucy versus the University of Alabama. This was the initial litigation that broke this die-hard resistance to desegregating public schools in Alabama. But Miss Lucy only lasted a few days because of an uproar and rioting on campus. She was eventually suspended and not allowed to attend school. It was not until 1963, in his representation of Vivian Malone and James Hood, did he succeed in permanently breaking down the color barrier at the University of Alabama. I noted that it was during this time that Thurgood Marshall often frequented our home because he was head of the NAAC legal counsel. My father was an attorney for that organization. So he handled a lot of these cases. And he and Mr. Marshall worked a lot together. And I remember I liked Mr. Marshall a lot because he always had time to play with my sister and me. There's a picture of me at the age of 13 riding his back in my cowboy suit because I like to play cowboys and he was my horse. And he galloped through the living room as I hit him with my rope and told him to giddy up. I've shared with you briefly excerpts from my childhood because I have found it impossible for us to navigate our future if we don't know from whence we've come. And as I said, knowledge of the past helps us put our vision for the future into perspective. None of us would deny that, yes, we have made significant gains in the struggle for equality. But let me remind you that the extension of American democracy is not complete. That the American dream for all has not been fully realized. You see, it's not enough to open the gates of opportunity. We have to have the ability to walk through those gates. We have not only sought freedom, but opportunity, not just legal equity, but equality as a fact of life. So our task over the last few years has been to see that African Americans have the same chance as every other American to learn, to grow, to work and share in society, to develop our abilities, and to pursue our individual happiness. Yes, things have gotten better over the past 5 decades, and America can be proud of that. But today there's still racism, and there's still growing concern for economic equality. I've learned a lot of things in my lifetime, and I've learned that when the economy is poor, that racism has a tendency to raise its ugly head, and people become embattled to fight to survive, to maintain equal rights, to find jobs. We're all, as men and women, born with the same range of ability. But ability is not just the product of birth. Ability is increased or decreased by the family you live in, by the community you live in, by the schools you go to, and by the poverty or richness of your surroundings. For the great majority of African Americans, the poor, the unemployed, the homeless, despite all of the legislative victories, despite all of the speeches, inequality and lack of opportunity and racism is still alive, and it's growing. After all, electing the nation's first black president does not mean we are a post-racial nation, but something more complex and complicated. Whether you're born in poverty or prosperity, our next generation's going to inherit an economy weakened by business failures, stagnant wages, increasing inequality, and deep divisions among the American people. For today, we have but to read the paper to see that profound forces are shaking and remaking our nation and world. Halfway around the world today, terrorists are trying to hurt Americans, blow up embassies, and many have been killed. Many of our people have been killed. The answer that begs the question is whether we in our hearts will make change our friend or our enemy. And I believe one way of making change is finding common ground among ourselves, not only among ourselves, but around other nations of the world. You see, it doesn't matter whether you are a hawk or you are a dove. You're just another bird living in the same environment. Can we today find common ground? Our politicians don't seem to be able to. That's why there must be some medium by which well-reasoned, intelligent people continue to transform and transmogrify society in what America is supposed to be and what it should be. As we find this common ground, perhaps we can move towards a better society in which there will be equal opportunity for all. As I said earlier, we don't expect these changes to come from our politicians because the thoughts and affections of men cannot be legislated. Only the actions of a person to some extent can be controlled. The unfortunate truth is that there is still inequality in our country, and it's like a cancer in the hearts of those who have prejudice and those who discriminate, and it violates the most basic human values of justice and equal opportunities. Make no doubt about it, prejudice and social injustice still exist in this country today, and it plays a role in determining what opportunities people have. Many Americans would rather admit that it's not the case, that we don't have that much racism in the country today. But I can look at my own state. With the passage of House Bill 59 that was passed last year, what did it tell us? As far as the Hispanic population is concerned, the meaning and message of that harsh bill, which, by the way, was one of the harshest immigration bills that's been passed in this country. The message that's sent to the brown people is that get out of Alabama. We don't want you here. That's the message that was conveyed. By passing this law, the state has shown that while Jim Crow laws may not exist anymore, the spirit of Jim Crow is alive and well. You know, as a country, we like to believe that we are all civilized and that we no longer let petty concerns like race influence our views. But it's time to speak out and call racism what it is and acknowledge that it still exists. It wounds our soul as a nation, and it obstructs the promise of our country. The secret hatreds and prejudices of an individual heart are not bridled by any law. There has to be a change in the minds and the hearts of people. We have to become more civically engaged, and there are many opportunities to do so. I feel very strongly that by engaging in civic action, we ensure and uphold certain democratic values, and these values permeate every aspect of our society and include justice and freedom and equality, respect, diversity, human rights, and self-respect. I have been asked what we can do to help make our country one that embraces diversity. And I say to you, you have to become civically engaged. When I returned to Birmingham, I said, which I said I would never do, but I did, but it was at the urging of my husband. I had a choice of staying in California by myself or moving to Birmingham. I said then, I'm here now, and that if I am going to make my community a better place for everybody that lives here, then I have to become involved. I have to become civically engaged in my community. So I say to you, becoming civically engaged in a community is one way of embracing this concept of diversity. Our task today is not finished, in spite of all of the progress that we have made. And I say to you this afternoon that you can no longer afford to ignore and sit idly by and wait for change. But we must keep the faith, and we must continue. We must continue to fight until this is truly a nation by the people and for all the people. Freedom and democracy, brotherhood and human rights, these are the practical expressions of the eternal worth of every child of God. You see, we all live with the same objectives of being happy. Our lives are different, and yet they are the same. As different as we may be in terms of our ethnicity and spirituality, and as different as our life experiences may be, everyone has the same goal in life, and that's to be happy. So we must all pull together to make sure that every person has opportunity. Now, as you leave here this evening, after having watched the film, The Four Little Girls, I have some questions that I want to ask you. One, are you willing to take an active stand against racism where you see it exists? Or will you merely return to the comfort of your home and the comfort of your sofa? Are you willing to stand up for what is right in the face of opposition, even though you may be standing out there alone? Are you willing to reach out and help others in their hour of need? Are you willing, young people, to work passionately to make a difference? If you can answer yes to these questions, then in the words of Frederick Douglass, you're the kind of person that can change the world. The plaque at the 16th Street Baptist Church that pictures the four little girls read, may men learn to replace bitterness with love and understanding. I leave you with this thought tonight, that until we as a people learn to see each other through the eyes of God, who is love, we will never see one another without fear and without prejudice. God bless you, and thank you very much for having me.